Her billionaire husband gave her old room away, so she never came back. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. A woman does not disappear from a mansion because she loses a room. She disappears when she finally understands she was never given a home. The thought moved through Naomi Brooks like a quiet bell as she stood at the end of the east hallway of the Whitmore estate, staring at a door that had once opened with the soft turn of her hand and now refused her like a stranger. The brass knob had been changed. The little scratch near the keyhole, the one she had made 2 winters ago while carrying too many canvases and laughing at herself, was gone beneath a new polished plate. Everything looked cleaner now. Colder. More expensive. Less hers. Beyond the door, she heard the careful sound of hangers sliding across a closet rail, the muted roll of luggage wheels over hardwood, and a woman's gentle laugh floating through the room where Naomi used to pray before sunrise. For 3 years, that room had been her refuge inside a house that measured nearly 16,000 square feet and somehow had never made space for her heart. It was not the master bedroom with its silk drapes and museum-like quiet. It was not the formal dining room where Margaret Whitmore corrected the way Naomi held a champagne glass with a smile sharp enough to draw blood without leaving a mark. It was not the grand staircase where photographers once called her beautiful while society women whispered that Grant Whitmore had always been impulsive. No, this small room at the east corner had been the only place where Naomi could breathe. It held the paintings her students had made for her, the old Bible her mother had carried to church every Sunday in Atlanta, a blue sweater that still faintly smelled of lavender, and a framed photograph of Naomi. And Grant on the day he proposed beside the Hudson River, before his world had taught him to be embarrassed by tenderness. She placed her palm against the door, not pushing, just remembering. Then it opened from the inside. Claire Ashford stood there in cream silk, her blonde hair pinned loosely, her expression startled but not guilty. Behind her, Naomi saw a suitcase on the reading chair, a row of designer shoes near the window, and one of Naomi's canvases leaning face down against the wall as if it had been asked to hide. "Oh," Claire said softly. "Naomi, I thought Margaret told you." Naomi did not answer. Her eyes moved past Claire to Grant Whitmore, her billionaire husband, standing near the fireplace with his phone in one hand and his jaw set in that familiar businesslike line that made employees obey and rooms go silent. He looked tired, elegant, untouchable in a navy suit that probably cost more than Naomi's first car. "Naomi," he said, lowering the phone. "Claire is staying for the foundation launch. Mother thought this room made the most sense." Mother thought. The words landed with more force than anger ever could. Naomi looked at the shelves where her books had been removed, the window where she used to watch rain silver the lawns, the corner where she had once cried quietly after Margaret introduced her at a luncheon as Grant's unexpected little love story. Grant stepped closer, voice calm, almost impatient. "It's just a room, Naomi. Don't make it emotional." The hallway seemed to lose its air. Claire looked down. Somewhere below, crystal glasses chimed, and the house continued breathing as if nothing sacred had been taken. Naomi turned her wedding ring once around her finger, slowly, carefully, like a woman checking whether something still fit. Then she lifted her eyes to Grant. "You're right," she said, her voice so steady it frightened even her. "It was never just a room." He frowned, not understanding, and perhaps that was the final answer she needed. Naomi did not shout. She did not embarrass him in front of Claire. She did not beg for a corner in a mansion that had learned to erase her politely. She simply stepped back from the doorway, carrying herself with the quiet grace of someone who had just found the edge of her own dignity. That night, Naomi Brooks did not lose a room. She finally saw the truth about her marriage, and before morning touched the marble floors of the Whitmore estate, she would leave behind the keys, the diamonds, the name, and the man who had given away the last place where she still felt seen. By the time Naomi reached the master bedroom, the sun had begun to sink behind the long line of maple trees that bordered the Whitmore estate, turning the windows gold while leaving the corners of the room in shadow. It was strange how beautiful the house could look while making her feel so small. The bedroom was larger than the first apartment she had ever rented in Atlanta, with a fireplace carved from Italian stone, a sitting area no one used, and a closet arranged with the quiet perfection of a luxury store after closing. Everything in it announced wealth, but almost nothing in it remembered love. Naomi stood beside the bed and let her eyes move across the life she had tried so hard to belong to. The framed wedding portrait on the dresser showed a younger Grant smiling at her, as if the world had finally become simple. Back then, he had not been the cold man in the hallway with a phone in his hand and his mother's decision in his mouth. Back then, he had been the man who came to her community art center in Brooklyn because his company was sponsoring a children's mural project, then stayed 2 extra hours helping a shy little boy paint yellow stars on a blue wall. Naomi had noticed his shoes first, polished black leather standing carefully away from the paint trays, then his hands, awkward but patient, holding a brush like a man learning a language he did not yet speak. He had laughed when a child painted a green stripe across his cuff. He had not cared that the suit was expensive. He had only looked at Naomi and said, "I think he improved it." That was the Grant she had trusted. The man who sent books instead of flowers after their first date because she had told him flowers made her sad when they died. The man who drove 90 miles in the rain to meet her aunt in New Jersey because Naomi said family mattered. The man who stood under a string of white lights beside the Hudson River and asked her to marry him with tears in his eyes, promising that no room in his life would ever be closed to her. She had believed him. Maybe that was the most human thing about her, not weakness, but faith. After the wedding, the Whitmore estate became a lesson Naomi had never asked to learn. Margaret Whitmore welcomed her with pearls, perfume, and perfect manners, yet every compliment carried a hidden correction. Naomi's natural curls were so bold for formal dinners. Her laugh was so full of life for board members. Her southern expressions were charming when guests were watching and a little too casual when the doors closed. Grant noticed some of it. Naomi knew he did, but he treated every wound like a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with a weekend trip, a new bracelet, or a quiet kiss on her forehead before another early flight. He loved her, perhaps, but he did not protect the space where that love needed to live. So Naomi created her own space. The room in the East Wing became more than 4 walls and a window. It became her proof that she still existed beneath the Whitmore name. She painted there when the house felt too quiet. She read letters from her late mother there when Margaret's words followed her like perfume she could not wash off. She kept the drawings from her former students in a wooden box beneath the desk because they reminded her that before she was introduced as Grant Whitmore's wife, she had already been someone. Now, even that had been decided without her. Naomi opened a drawer and took out the blue sweater her mother had given her the winter before she passed. She folded it once, then again, with hands that did not tremble. On the wall, the wedding portrait caught the last light, and for a moment Grant's painted smile seemed almost alive, almost sorry. Naomi looked at it for a long time. Then she turned it face down on the dresser, not out of hatred, but because memory had become too heavy to carry uncovered. Downstairs, voices rose softly as preparations for the foundation dinner continued, crystal and silver being placed for people who would praise generosity inside a house where one woman had been made to feel replaceable. Naomi reached for a small overnight bag from the closet shelf. She did not pack like a woman running away. She packed like a woman finally returning to herself. Naomi had almost finished packing when the knock came, soft enough to pretend it was polite, firm enough to remind her whose house she was in. She did not answer at first. She placed her mother's Bible inside the overnight bag, wrapped a small canvas in a gray cardigan, and closed the zipper halfway before turning toward the door. Margaret Whitmore entered without waiting, wrapped in a silver evening dress that caught the fading light like frost. Her pearls sat perfectly at her throat, and her smile had the polished calm of a woman who had never needed to raise her voice to make people feel beneath her. "Naomi," she said, glancing at the bag, "I hope you are not turning a simple inconvenience into a family problem." Naomi stood beside the dresser, still wearing the soft cream blouse she had chosen that morning when she thought the day might be ordinary. "A family problem," she repeated quietly. Margaret's eyes moved to the face-down wedding portrait, then back to Naomi. "Claire is only staying for a few weeks. She has been close to this family for years, And the foundation launch is important to Grant. Important to all of us. All of us. Naomi had heard that phrase often enough to know it rarely included her. My things were removed without asking me, she said. My books, my paintings, my mother's letters. Someone changed the lock. Margaret sighed, not with regret, but with the practiced weariness of someone dealing with a servant who had misunderstood instructions. Dear, you live in one of the most beautiful homes in Westchester County. You have cars, staff, security, anything a woman could want. Surely you can understand why it seems ungrateful to attach so much meaning to one small room. Naomi looked toward the window where the lawn rolled out in perfect green waves, trimmed by men whose names no one at the dinner table knew. For a moment, she saw herself from far away, the black wife in the grand house, expected to be thankful for comfort even when comfort came without respect. That room was not about luxury, Naomi said. It was about peace. Margaret's expression tightened by one careful inch. Peace requires maturity. Marriage into a family like this requires flexibility. Grant carries responsibilities you cannot fully understand. The words were calm, but the old message was clear. Be grateful. Be quiet. Be smaller. Naomi picked up the wooden box from the chair, the one filled with drawings from children she had once taught in Brooklyn. On top was a picture of a yellow house with purple windows, made by a little girl who had written, "Miss Naomi says every person deserves a safe place." Naomi ran her thumb along the edge of the paper and felt something inside her settle, not break, settle. I understand more than you think, she said. I understand what it feels like to be displayed at charity events as proof of kindness, then dismissed at home as an inconvenience. I understand what it feels like to hear my husband praised for generosity while his wife has to ask permission to keep a corner of herself untouched. I understand that being allowed inside a house is not the same as being welcomed into a family. For the first time, Margaret had no immediate answer. Downstairs, the sound of guests arriving drifted up through the floor, the low hum of wealth gathering beneath chandeliers. Somewhere, Grant was probably shaking hands, smiling for donors, standing in front of banners about compassion. Margaret looked toward the hallway, then back at Naomi, and her voice lowered. Do not embarrass him tonight. Naomi gave a small, almost sad smile. I protected Grant from embarrassment for 3 years. I corrected my tone. I changed my hair for dinners. I swallowed comments that would have humiliated me if I'd said them back. I smiled beside people who never bothered to learn who I was before I wore his name. I have done enough protecting. Margaret's face lost a little color beneath its perfect makeup. And what exactly do you plan to do? Naomi placed the wooden box into the bag and closed it with a gentle click. Nothing dramatic. She reached for the envelope she had already addressed and set it on the dresser beside her wedding ring, which now looked strangely small against the dark wood. That is what will make it honest. At that moment, Grant appeared in the doorway behind his mother, his expression caught between impatience and concern. He looked from the bag to the ring, then to Naomi's face, and something uncertain moved through his eyes. Naomi, the guests are downstairs, he said. We can talk about this tomorrow. The old Naomi might have accepted tomorrow like a promise. The woman standing before him knew tomorrow was often where powerful men placed the pain they did not want to face today. She lifted her coat from the chair. No, Grant, she said softly. Tomorrow is where I begin healing. Then she walked past him without touching his sleeve, without waiting for permission, without looking back at the room that had once held the last pieces of her. Behind her, the mansion continued glowing for the guests, bright and flawless from the outside. But Naomi had finally understood that some houses only look beautiful because the people inside them have learned to hide the cracks. The staircase seemed longer than Naomi remembered, not because of its height, but because every step carried the weight of a life she had once tried to save alone. Below her, the Whitmore estate glowed with practiced elegance. Candles flickered inside crystal holders. A string quartet played something soft and European, and guests moved through the grand foyer in gowns and black tuxedos, speaking in low voices about generosity, legacy, and the future of children they would never meet. Naomi descended quietly with her overnight bag in one hand and her coat folded over her arm. No one noticed her at first. To them, she was part of the scenery, another beautiful detail inside a beautiful house, the billionaire's wife who knew how to smile, stand straight, and make discomfort look like grace. Grant followed several steps behind her, his polished shoes striking the marble with more urgency than he intended. "Naomi," he said under his breath, close enough for only her to hear. "Please, not tonight." She paused near the bottom of the staircase and turned slightly. His face was controlled, but his eyes were beginning to understand that this was not a disagreement to be postponed. "That is what you said last Christmas," she replied softly, "and at your mother's birthday dinner, and after the board retreat in Palm Beach. There was always a reason my pain needed to wait." Grant looked toward the ballroom doors, where cameras flashed as the first donors arrived for photographs. The Whitmore Foundation banner stood near the entrance, printed in gold letters above the words "Dignity begins at home." Naomi noticed the phrase at the same time he did. For one brief second, neither of them moved. The irony was too delicate to touch and too sharp to ignore. Margaret appeared behind Grant, smiling at a senator's wife, while watching Naomi from the corner of her eye. Claire stood farther back near the east hallway, pale and still, no longer looking like a guest, but like a woman who had accidentally walked into the middle of someone else's heartbreak and discovered she had been given a room that was never empty. Naomi kept walking. Near the front door, Mr. Alvarez, the estate's longtime driver, stepped forward with concern in his kind brown eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore, would you like the car brought around?" The name struck her gently, not as an honor, but as a coat that no longer fit. "No, thank you," Naomi said. "I have already called a ride." He glanced at the small bag in her hand, then lowered his voice. "Are you all right, ma'am?" It was the first honest question anyone in that house had asked her all evening. Naomi's throat tightened, but her voice remained calm. "I will be." Grant reached her before she could open the door. "You are leaving with one bag?" he asked, as though the size of the luggage might prove this was not real. Naomi looked at him, the man she had once loved with the bright faith of a woman who believed promises could build walls strong enough to protect her. "Everything else belongs to this house," she said. "What I am taking belongs to me." He shook his head slowly. "We can fix this. I will speak to my mother. I will move Claire to another. Sweet, you can have the room back tonight." Naomi's eyes softened, and that softness frightened him more than anger would have. "Grant, I am not leaving because I need the room back." Outside, headlights swept across the circular driveway, and rain began to fall in a fine silver mist over the stone steps. The house behind them shimmered with music, money, and applause waiting to happen. Naomi opened the door, and cool evening air touched her face like mercy. "I am leaving because I finally understand that a woman should not have to lose herself to prove she is loyal." Grant said her name once more, but this time it sounded less like a command and more like a prayer he had forgotten how to finish. Naomi stepped into the rain without an umbrella. The driver from the rideshare hurried to take her bag, but she held it for a moment longer, looking back at the mansion where every window blazed with light. For 3 years, she had mistaken brightness for warmth. Now, as the car door closed and the estate grew smaller behind her, Naomi placed her hand over her mother's Bible inside the bag and breathed for what felt like the first time in months. She did not know where the night would take her. She only knew she was no longer asking to be kept in a place where her dignity had to stand outside the door. The rideshare dropped Naomi in front of a 4-story brick building in Brooklyn just after 9 o'clock, where the rain had softened the sidewalks and turned the streetlights into halos on the pavement. Maya Brooks was already waiting beneath the awning in sweatpants, an old college hoodie, and slippers, her arms folded against the cold, her face tight with the kind of worry only a sister could wear without apology. She did not ask why Naomi had only one bag. She did not ask what Grant had done. She simply stepped forward, took the coat from Naomi's arm, and pulled her into a hug that smelled like peppermint tea and laundry soap. For a moment, Naomi stood very still. Then her shoulders lowered, and the breath she had been holding since the east hallway finally left her body. Maya's apartment was on the 3rd floor, a narrow walk-up with creaking stairs, warm yellow lamps, and radiators that hissed like tired old men. It had no marble foyer, no staff, no security gate, no chandeliers glowing above polished guests. The sofa had a faded blue blanket over one arm. The kitchen table leaned slightly to the left, and the window looked out over a laundromat sign that blinked every few seconds. Yet when Naomi stepped inside, something inside her unclenched. This place did not try to impress anyone. It simply held people. Maya made tea without speaking, setting a mug in Naomi's hands before sitting across from her at the small table. The quiet between them was not empty. It was safe. After a long while, Naomi opened her bag and took out her mother's Bible, the wooden box of children's drawings, and the gray cardigan wrapped around her small canvas. Maya watched every item appear like evidence from a life Naomi had almost left behind. "Did he let you walk out?" Maya asked at last. Naomi looked down at the steam rising from the mug. "He still thinks I walked out over a room." Maya's mouth tightened. Men with mansions can be very confused about what shelter means. Naomi almost smiled, but the ache in her chest was too fresh. She slept that night on Maya's couch under the faded blue blanket, listening to traffic pass below and the radiator knock softly in the dark. It was not a perfect sleep, but it was the first honest one she had known in months. No footsteps outside the door. No careful laughter from rooms where she had to prepare her face before entering. No fear that one wrong sentence would become proof she did not belong. In the morning, sunlight came through the blinds in thin bright stripes, touching the floor, the sofa, the edge of her mother's Bible. Naomi woke before Maya and sat quietly, watching dust move in the light. She expected panic. Instead, she felt grief standing beside something stronger. By noon, Maya had taken her to a small community center near Bedford Avenue, where she volunteered twice a week as a nurse. The building had scuffed floors, bulletin boards crowded with flyers, and a children's mural half-finished along the hallway. Naomi stopped in front of it, her fingers hovering near a painted sun with uneven yellow rays. A woman named Mrs. Evelyn Carter, the program director, noticed her looking and asked if she had ever taught art. Naomi almost said, "I used to." Then she corrected herself. "Yes," she said, "I do." 2 weeks later, Naomi began leading a free art class for women rebuilding their lives after loss, divorce, illness, and disappointment. There were no wealthy donors in the room, no cameras, no silver trays of champagne. Just folding chairs, paper cups of coffee, donated paint, and women who arrived carrying invisible rooms they had been forced to leave behind. On the first day, Naomi asked them to draw a place where they felt safe. Some drew kitchens. Some drew churches. One woman drew nothing but a locked door. Naomi looked at the blank space around that door and felt her own story looking back at her. She picked up a brush, dipped it into blue paint, and began filling a canvas with a window open to morning light. For the first time since leaving the Whitmore estate, she was not trying to prove she deserved space. She was creating it. For the first few weeks after Naomi left, Grant Whitmore treated her absence like a temporary disruption, the kind of problem a capable man could solve once his calendar allowed room for it. He sent flowers to Maya's apartment, then a handwritten note, then a message through his assistant asking whether Naomi would prefer the townhouse in Manhattan or the beach property in Rhode Island while they worked through things. Naomi answered none of them, not because she was cruel, but because every offer still sounded like architecture instead of accountability. At the Whitmore estate, the foundation dinner had been called a success by every newspaper that cared about polished photographs and wealthy smiles. Grant stood beside his mother in the society pages beneath the headline, praising his commitment to family-centered philanthropy. In the picture, his expression looked flawless. In the house afterward, he looked like a man waiting for sound to return to a room. Claire Ashford stayed 3 more days in the East Wing before packing her own bags with quiet embarrassment. Grant found her near the front entrance one morning, wearing a camel coat and holding her gloves in one hand. "You do not have to leave," he said, though even he heard the emptiness in the offer. Claire looked past him toward the hallway that led to Naomi's room. "Yes, I do." Her voice was gentle, but there was no softness in the truth behind it. "Your mother told me Naomi barely used that space. She said it was more like storage." Grant did not answer. Claire studied his face for a moment, then said, "She did not leave because of me, Grant. She left because everyone in this house learned they could move her life around without asking you, and you taught them there would be no consequence." The sentence stayed with him long after the front door closed behind her. That afternoon, Grant walked to the East Wing alone. The room was clean again, stripped of Claire's perfume, luggage, and temporary presence, but it did not feel restored. It felt abandoned in a way furniture could not fix. A few of Naomi's things had been placed in boxes by the staff, careful, and labeled, as though grief could be organized by category. Grant opened one box and found a stack of children's drawings, a chipped mug painted with the words "Miss Naomi sees the good," and an unfinished canvas wrapped in brown paper. He unwrapped it slowly. The painting showed a long conference table under cold white light. At one end sat a man in a dark suit, his back turned. Outside the glass wall stood a woman holding a small lamp in both hands, waiting to be noticed. At the bottom, in Naomi's graceful handwriting, was the title, "The Man Who Loved Me in Public But Forgot Me at Home." Grant sat down in the chair by the window, the same chair where Claire's suitcase had rested, and for the first time he did not feel wronged by Naomi's silence. He felt exposed by it. Memories returned without mercy, not loud memories, but small ones. Naomi pausing before dinner to take a breath before entering the dining room. Naomi smiling when Margaret corrected her, then washing dishes alone in the kitchen even though the house had staff, because she needed something ordinary to hold on to. Naomi standing beside him at galas while he spoke about dignity, opportunity, and belonging, her hand resting lightly on his arm as if she were anchoring him, while he never asked who anchored her. That evening, he found Margaret in the formal sitting room, reading donor correspondence beneath a portrait of his grandfather. "Why did you change the lock?" he asked. Margaret looked up slowly. "Because the staff needed access while rearranging the room." Naomi did not have access. His voice was quiet, but something in it made his mother close the folder. "Grant, do not rewrite this into cruelty." She was being sensitive. He looked at the portrait, then back at the woman who had raised him to win boardrooms and avoid scenes, to preserve legacy before tenderness. "No," he said. She was being erased. Margaret's lips parted, but Grant did not wait for her answer. He returned to the East Room and placed Naomi's unfinished canvas on the easel near the window. Outside, the estate lights flickered on across acres of perfect lawn, but the room remained dim. Grant stood there until night settled fully over the house, finally understanding that money could buy privacy, beauty, and silence, but it could not buy back the moment a woman stopped believing she was safe with you. 1 year later, the ballroom of the Harrington Civic Arts Center glowed with a different kind of light than the Whitmore estate had ever known. It was not colder, not grander, not designed to make people feel small. Its walls were lined with student paintings, community portraits, and photographs of women standing beside doors they had painted in bright colors, each one representing a place they had rebuilt inside themselves. Grant arrived late, not because he meant to, but because he had spent 10 minutes in the parking garage reminding himself that he was not there to reclaim anything. He had been invited by the board of the Whitmore Foundation, one of many sponsors listed near the bottom of the evening program. He had not known Naomi would be there. At least, that was what he told himself until he saw the title printed in clean black letters across the program cover: The Open Room Project Annual Benefit. His hand tightened slightly around the paper. Across the lobby, Margaret stood in a pale blue suit, speaking to another donor with her usual controlled smile, but even she seemed unsettled by the warmth of the room. There were no marble lions, no family portraits, no silver-framed reminders of inherited importance. There were folding art stations for children, a wall where guests could write what safety meant to them, and volunteers moving through the crowd with name tags and easy laughter. Then the lights dimmed, and the applause began before Grant understood why. Naomi stepped onto the stage in an ivory dress that fell simply to her knees, her natural curls swept back with a small gold pin, her skin radiant beneath the soft stage lights. She wore no diamonds from the Whitmore vault, no symbol of his name, no armor borrowed from wealth. She looked calm, not untouched by pain, but no longer owned by it. On the screen behind her appeared her name, Naomi Brooks, founder of the Open Room Project. The room rose to its feet. Women from her classes stood first, then children, then donors, then the entire hall, until the applause became a wave that seemed to wash every old silence from the air. Grant remained seated for half a second too long, stunned by the simple truth before him. She had not vanished after leaving him. She had become more visible than ever. Naomi waited until the room quieted, then placed both hands gently on the podium. "When I first came back to Brooklyn," she said, her voice steady and warm, "I thought I had lost my home. I thought healing meant finding another place where people would let me stay. But the women in our first art class taught me something better. A safe place is not always given to you. Sometimes you build it with your own hands. Then hold the door open for someone else. Grant felt the words move through the room and land where no apology of his had ever reached. Naomi spoke about women who had started over after divorce, illness, grief, job loss, and quiet forms of rejection no one saw from the outside. She spoke about children who painted houses with windows bigger than walls. She spoke about dignity without bitterness, pain without spectacle, and love as something that must include respect or else become only decoration. Near the end, she looked across the audience, and for one brief moment, her eyes met Grant's. There was no accusation in them. That almost hurt more. There was recognition, yes, but not need. Memory, but not invitation. Grace, but not surrender. Margaret shifted beside him, her hands folded tightly over her purse. Grant heard his mother whisper, almost to herself, "She did all this?" He did not answer, because the answer was standing under the lights, receiving applause not for being attached to a powerful man, but for becoming a shelter for people who had forgotten they deserved one. When Naomi stepped away from the podium, a little girl ran up and handed her a painting of a yellow room with an open blue door. Naomi bent down, accepted it with both hands, and smiled with the kind of tenderness Grant remembered from the mural project years ago, before he had confused providing with loving. The audience rose again. This time Grant stood with them, slowly, fully, his eyes fixed on the woman he had once asked to live in his world, only to discover she had gone out and built one with more mercy than his own had ever shown her. She had not come back to him. She had come back to herself. After the applause softened and the crowd began moving toward the reception tables, Naomi stepped down from the stage with the little girl's painting tucked carefully beneath one arm. People stopped her every few feet to shake her hand, thank her, tell her about a sister, a daughter, a mother, or a friend who needed a place like this. She listened to each person as if no one in the room was more important than the voice in front of her. Grant watched from near the back wall, holding his untouched glass of sparkling water, feeling for the first time in his life that wealth had made him visible in every room except the one where he needed to be honest. He waited until the crowd thinned and the volunteers began clearing empty cups from the tables. Naomi was standing beside a display of painted doors when he finally approached. The door nearest her was lavender with the words, "I am allowed to begin again," written in careful white letters. Grant stopped several feet away, leaving space between them like a language he was still learning. "Naomi," he said. She turned, and for a moment the year between them stood quietly in the air. "Grant." Her voice was calm, not cold, and somehow that made him feel the full weight of what he had lost. He looked different than she remembered, not less handsome, but less certain. The sharp confidence that once made rooms organize themselves around him had softened into something quieter. He had come without security, without his assistant, without flowers, without the performance of apology. "What you built here is beautiful," he said. Naomi glanced around the hall, at the paintings, the volunteers, the children taping paper stars to a community wall. "It was built by many hands, but it began with yours." She studied him carefully. A year ago, he would have said something like that as praise, polished and easy. Tonight, it sounded like recognition. Grant lowered his gaze to the program in his hand, its edges bent from how tightly he had held it. "I thought giving you comfort meant I had loved you well," he said. "The house, the staff, the trips, the things I could provide. I confused access with belonging. I let people call it generosity when all I was doing was placing you inside my life without making room for who you were." Naomi's fingers rested lightly on the child's painting. She did not interrupt. That silence asked more of him than anger ever had. "I should have protected your peace," he continued. "Not because you were my wife in public, but because you were a person in private. I should have noticed when you became careful in your own home. I should have listened the first time you went quiet." His voice broke slightly on the last word, but he did not reach for sympathy. Naomi looked at him then, really looked, and saw that regret had finally done what luxury never could. It had stripped him of excuses. "You hurt me, Grant," she said softly. "Not with one decision. With many small permissions you gave other people over my life." He nodded. "I know. Do you?" "I am learning." The answer was not grand. That made it better. For a while, only the sounds of the reception moved around. Them, chairs folding, children laughing, rain tapping lightly against the tall windows. Then Grant reached into his coat pocket and took out a small envelope, holding it without offering it too quickly. I reopened the East Room, he said. Everything of yours that remained is there. Your painting is on the easel by the window. I did not finish it. I did not move it. I just wanted you to know it was no longer locked. Naomi looked at the envelope but did not take it. That room was never the whole wound. I understand that now. And opening it again does not reopen me. Grant closed his eyes briefly, accepting the sentence like a verdict he had earned. I am not asking you to come back tonight. But you are asking. He looked at her, honest at last. Yes. Naomi's eyes filled, but no tear fell. She had cried enough in rooms that did not deserve the sound. I forgive you, she said. Grant inhaled as if the words had reached a place in him no medicine could touch. Then come home. Naomi shook her head gently. Forgiveness is not a moving truck. The sentence settled between them, firm and merciful at the same time. I can forgive you and still choose the life that taught me how to breathe. I can care about who you are becoming without returning to who I had to be beside you. Grant looked down, and this time his silence was not avoidance. It was respect. Across the room, Margaret watched them from beside a pillar, her face pale, her pearls still perfect, her eyes finally unsure. Naomi saw her, then turned back to Grant. If you truly want to make things right, do not start with me. Start with the way you use your power when no one is applauding. Grant nodded slowly. Tell me how. Naomi looked toward the wall of painted doors, each one made by someone who had learned that dignity could be rebuilt plank by plank, color by color, truth by truth. Do not ask to own the room, she said. Help keep the door open. 3 months after the benefit, the old brick building on Bedford Avenue opened its doors under a new sign painted in warm blue letters. The Naomi Brooks Room, a place where every woman is seen. The name had not been Naomi's idea. She had argued against it for nearly 20 minutes, standing in the middle of the renovated space, while Mrs. Evelyn Carter smiled at her with the patience of a woman who had already won. Child, Mrs. Carter had said, holding a paintbrush like a judge's gavel. You spent a year teaching women they were allowed to take up space. Do not shrink when we make room for you. So Naomi accepted it, not as praise, but as a promise. The room was nothing like the east wing of the Whitmore estate. Its floors were maple, not marble. Its windows faced a busy Brooklyn street where buses sighed at the curb and children hurried past with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. The shelves held donated art supplies, paper lanterns, photographs from past classes, and a wooden box where women could leave notes for the next person who needed courage. On opening morning, Grant arrived early in a dark coat and no entourage, carrying 2 boxes of sketchbooks from a local store. He had funded the renovation through the Whitmore Foundation, but his name appeared nowhere on the wall, nowhere on the program, nowhere in the speeches. When Mrs. Carter thanked the anonymous donor, Grant stood at the back beside the coffee table, his hands folded in front of him, and simply listened. Naomi noticed. More importantly, she noticed that he did not ask whether she noticed. That was how change began to look on him, not like a grand gesture, but like restraint. Margaret came too, wearing a simple gray dress instead of pearls, her silver hair pinned back, without its usual perfection. She waited until the crowd thinned before approaching Naomi near the wall of painted doors. For a moment, the 2 women stood together in a quiet that once would have been filled by politeness. Margaret looked at the photographs of women smiling beside their paintings, then lowered her gaze. Naomi Brooks, she said, using the full name carefully, as if returning something she had once taken. I owe you an apology. Naomi did not make it easier for her. She had learned that grace did not require rescuing people from the discomfort of their own truth. Margaret took a slow breath. I made you feel like a guest in your own marriage. I treated your background as something to manage instead of something to honor. I called it tradition when it was really fear. Her eyes lifted, older now, less certain. I am sorry. Naomi felt the words enter her gently. They did not erase the dinners, the corrections, the locked door, or the years of swallowing herself smaller. But they mattered. Truth spoken late was still better than silence protected forever. Thank you, Naomi said. I hope you mean it in the rooms where I am not standing. Margaret nodded, and this time her silence sounded like humility. Later, as children filled the tables with color and women wrote messages on paper stars, Grant found Naomi near the front window. Outside, afternoon light spilled across the sidewalk, bright enough to turn the glass golden. The east room is still open, he said quietly. I know, Naomi replied. He looked at her, not asking, not reaching, only present. And this room, he asked. Naomi looked around at Maya laughing with volunteers, at Mrs. Carter helping a nervous woman choose a brush, at the little girl from the benefit taping her yellow room painting above the supply shelf. This one is open too, she said, but it belongs to everyone. Grant smiled faintly, and for once there was no sadness in the space between them, only something unfinished and honest. They were not suddenly healed. Real life did not close its wounds because music swelled or sunlight found the right window. They still had conversations ahead, boundaries to respect, trust to rebuild slowly if it was meant to be rebuilt at all. But Naomi no longer measured love by whether a man begged her to return. She measured it by whether he respected the woman who had survived leaving. That evening, after the last guest had gone and the room smelled of paint, coffee, and raindamp coats, Naomi stood alone beneath the blue sign. She placed her mother's Bible on the small bookshelf by the window, not hidden in a private room, not locked behind anyone else's decision, but resting where any tired heart could find it. She touched the cover once, then looked at the open door. A home, she finally understood, was not the place where people allowed you to stay. A home was the place where your dignity did not have to knock.